Hello and welcome. You're watching Outlook Money interview. We are back with a brand new episode. Well, one of the big debates that has divided the experts and the economists is about the state of the Indian economy, and the data coming in are quite worrisome. The GDP number has plummeted to 4.5%, which is one of the lowest in last 6 years. And if we go by government on projected GDP for financial year 20 is 5%, which is one of the lowest in last 11 years. Retail inflation, which has just come out, has inched up to 7.35%, which is also one of the worst since July 2014, and the unemployment rate is also at the highest level in last 45 years. So even though economists and experts are having a divergent viewpoint on this, but there is a clear recognition that something has gone wrong in the Indian economy. So who should be held responsible for this? Was it demonetization or GST or the effect of both? And what's ailing the Indian economy? So these are the key questions we are asking today to Mr. Pronab Sen, who is a former chief statistician and an economist.
Thanks, Mr. Sen. Thanks for joining us and talking to us.
A pleasure.
So, firstly, I would like to start off with a question that former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh warned in November that seeing the current economic scenario, we are entering in a stage of stagflation, which constitutes the plummeting GDP, high inflation rates, and higher unemployment rate. And now we are seeing that GDP has plummeted to 4.5%, which is lowest in last 6 years. Unemployment rate is at 45-year high, and inflation is worst since July 2014. So it would be appropriate to say that we are entering in a stage of stagflation?
Not really, because what you're seeing actually is that the inflationary numbers are being driven essentially by agricultural products, and to a smaller extent, the recent number, it was telecom. The core inflation continues to be subdued, and if I take out the telecom effect, it's actually going down. So what we are really looking at is that if we exclude agriculture from this picture, what we are looking at is almost a deflation. Okay? Stagflation is when output is not growing, but inflation keeps moving up. That's not the case that we are seeing. In fact, we are seeing that in a lot of sectors, prices are actually coming down, and in some cases going negative. Some have already gone negative, and more will go negative.
So whenever the discussion about the nature of the slowdown stirs up, so there is one segment that says that it is a structural slowdown. There is one segment which says that it is a cyclical slowdown. And there is another segment which says it's due to partly due to structural elements and partly due to cyclical. So I want to ask you which segment you belong to. And according to your analysis, is this structural, cyclical, or partly cyclical or partly structural?
Well, it's difficult to say. Because if you look at the cyclical component, the economy should have been peaking at around 17, 18, and post that we should be on the downward side of the cycle. But in 17, 18, you had two structural shocks. One was demonetization and the second was GST. Okay? Now, my sense is that those two shocks have much more dominated than the cyclical feature. So what we are looking at the moment, to my mind, is largely a structural problem. The cyclical component, I think, has been pretty much wiped out.
As many experts and economists are saying that we are looking at a prospect of entering into a recession. So do you think that this argument holds currency?
Well, unless something is done to reverse the process, the possibility exists. I mean, we should not underplay that. To believe that if we just keep our hands off, somehow the economy is going to turn around, may be over-optimistic.
And so whenever we talk about the GDP numbers, like this is the only parameter to see how economy is faring. So whenever the discussion about the GDP starts up, so the central point is about the mechanism of estimation. And it was not a very long ago when Arvind Subramanian, former chief economic advisor, said that India's GDP has been overestimated by 2.5% between 2011 and 17. So right now the GDP is at lowest 4.5%. Do you think that it's far more lower than that, because informal sector is something that we don't have a proper data of?
Well, I disagree with Arvind, frankly, in his assessment. The GDP may be slightly overestimated, but I don't think it was consistently overestimated by 2.5%. It may in fact have been underestimated for all we know. I think there's a presumption that is going there. The main reason why this whole debate crops up is that the GDP estimates, by and large, tend to pick up only the corporate behavior, other than agriculture, where we do have independent data. Now, if the corporate and the non-corporate sector are behaving roughly similarly, GDP estimates are fairly accurate. But post 2017-18 onwards, I think that connect has broken. So we had the situation where the non-corporate sector went down because of these two shocks, but the corporate sector actually went up. And so the two are moving in different directions. And since we're extrapolating using corporate data, we may have overestimated the GDP. The point is, at this moment, the corporate sector is coming down. That's what the GDP numbers are telling you. What is happening to the non-corporate sector, we still don't know. It could have turned up. We have no hard numbers on it. But Arvind's point was from 11-12 to 17-18, where this part of the story doesn't play out. And on this, I disagree with him, and I'm on record on that. And it's something we can take up because it is a little more technical.
So recently, according to NSO's leaked consumer expenditure survey in November 2019, the real per capita household expenditure has fallen for the first time in last 40 years. So the immediate conclusion that can be drawn out of it, that poverty headcount ratios in India between 17 and 18 has been increased. So how do you see this situation and where we are heading into this, and what has gone wrong that the poverty headcount ratio has been increasing?
Well, you see, we don't know whether it has been increasing or not. Okay, 17-18, as I said, is a special year. Now think of what happened post demonetization. All of us had to cut our consumption quite substantially because we simply didn't have the cash to buy things. Now this is particularly true of the poor, whose all their transactions were cash driven. So in 17-18, the fact that consumption has come down compared to 11-12 should not necessarily be interpreted as the culmination of a process over 6 years. It could be simply the effect of demonetization in that 1 year. Right? We don't have any way of actually being able to say which is the case, whether it's 6 years of continuous decline or 1 year of sudden decline. My tendency is to think of it as the latter, that it is 1 year of sudden decline. We will know when the next consumer survey happens, which way the trend is going.
So when we trace the history of slowdowns in India, there was one in 2002-3, then there was the effect of a taper tantrum in 12-13. So how do you differentiate the slowdown? Because the GDP number also fallen to 4.5% during 2-3, but the fundamentals were quite strong. But now fundamentals have been shaken. So how do you differentiate this slowdown in comparison to the previous slowdowns?
You see, this slowdown is mainly a demand-driven slowdown. The earlier slowdowns really came from all sorts of supply-side disruptions that had happened. Whether we are talking about the 2002-3, in fact it starts from 99, or you're talking about 12-13, they're all supply-side disruptions. This is not. Here the supply side was all right. This is a demand side. Now on the demand side, the tendency for the economy to continue slipping is stronger than if it's a pure supply side. You fix the supply problem and you're back. Here, fixing the demand problem is a longer term activity. You really have to work hard at it.
And so don't you think that as of now we are caught in a very bizarre and sort of a baffling situation when all indicators and the economy is sputtering? The Sensex and all markets are like indicators are in bad and Sensex is powering ahead. So how do you decode this situation?
Well, you see, there are two things that happen. The first is the external environment. No matter how bad things are, India still looks reasonably good to external portfolio investments. So portfolio investments have continued to be decent. On the other side, there is the domestic element. And this again, I don't think people have interpreted properly. So what happened is that if you look at the last 1 year, a little more than 1 year, the RBI has aggressively pumped money into the Indian economy through open market operations. Now, open market operation essentially means buying government bonds. What makes a lot of difference is who's selling the bond. Now, by and large, government bonds are held by two types of institutions. It's either the banks or other financial institutions and some corporates who hold it as a part of their treasury operations. Banks don't. Now, if it's the bank who has sold the bond, then the bank is getting cash for it, which it can then use to expand its loan portfolio. But that did not happen. It's not the banks who actually sold the bonds. It was the other institutions which did. Now, as I said, for them, this was a part of their treasury. So when you sell one asset and you get cash in return, you will buy another asset to replace it. Okay, because at the end of the day, it's a part of your assets rather than your flow. Now, for these institutions, the only other assets are in the stock market. So they put their money, so the increase of money supply that came into the Indian economy, its first round effect was it went into the stock market and gave the stock market a boost, which it would not have happened otherwise.
And so about 2.5 weeks from now, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is going to present the budget in the Parliament. It's such a precarious situation and it's going to be one of the daunting tasks in front of her to boost the dampening spirit. So, according to you, what it will take for the government to unleash the animal spirits in the economy and to boost the sentiment?
You see, animal spirits are about investors. Okay? I think focusing on investors at this time is the wrong approach. You should really focus on the consumer. And ask yourself the question, what would it require to revive consumer confidence? Because if you look at the RBI series on consumer confidence, that's taken a massive drop. That's the one you should be focusing on, not investor confidence. Once this has stabilized and preferably gone up, investor confidence will come back.
So what are the various steps Finance Minister can include in her budget to boost the consumer confidence and consumer spirit in the economy?
You see, that is relatively difficult to do. I mean, there are some fairly obvious kinds of things that can be done. I mean, for instance, PM Kisan. PM Kisan, the rollout has been very poor. Can be speeded up. The other is NREGA. Provide more funds. The state governments are crying. But that apart, I think what the government needs to do is to give enough confidence to those who are at the, what should I say, the sort of the base of all consumption in India, which is the rural sector as a whole and the informal sector at the center. Now, the government doesn't have any direct steps, but in terms of, for instance, on agriculture, on things like price support, making sure that all the payments, all the subsidies are going out, all of this will have to be done. Saying that, whatever the government can do to support consumption, we will do. But directly addressing confidence, the government does not have really a role. On the investment side, the government does, but not on the consumer side.
So my next question is that we are seeing that we are dealing under a severe slowdown. So do you think that it's going to end anytime soon, or do you see that it's going to get much more severe with the passage of time?
Well, that's difficult to say. What has happened is that after the shock of demonetization, I think the unorganized sector is starting to limp back. Now, how strongly that growth will happen will depend very largely upon what kind of income support is provided during the interim period. So much will depend upon what are the kind of interventions that the budget talks about. If it does support this income support and strengthens them, then it may not last that long. But if that doesn't happen and income expectations, particularly among the poor, continue to fall, then it could be much more prolonged.
So when we talks about the slowdown, when we talk about the slowdown, the government from time to time has said that there are visible signs of recovery in the economy. In terms of GST collection that have crossed over 1 lakh crore 2 months in a row. Then index of industrial production first time after contracting for 3 consecutive months has gone in a positive territory. Do you think that these are the visible signs of recovery and we should be satisfied?
Well, there are some such signs of recovery. As far as the IIP is concerned, I mean, if you look at it a little more closely as to what has happened, almost the entire growth, all other components of the IIP are in fact in negative territory. The only one that is really large and strongly positive is intermediate goods, which means that the destocking that was happening earlier, that seems to have stopped, and a certain amount of restocking is taking place, which is a good thing. But it is a good thing only if and only if demand continues to or starts picking up. If it doesn't, then it will reverse itself again.
So in May last year, Ratin Roy, then the member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory, said that India's growth is going to be, India is going to be in middle income trap, going to fall in the middle income trap. Basically, he also said that we are going to treat the same path countries like Brazil and South Africa, and we can't replicate the growth trajectory of China and South Korea. So what's your viewpoint on that?
You see, the point he's making, I think, is a very basic one, and it pretty much gels with what I've been telling you. If you want sustained growth for a long period of time and not getting trapped, what you need is people to consistently move up in terms of their income status. Okay? So if you're thinking of an income pyramid, where the rich are at the top and the poor are at the bottom, the entire pyramid should be moving up. What is happening in India, or at least was happening, is that the top part of the pyramid was moving up, the bottom actually stayed where it was and may have in fact gone down a little bit. Right? That is not sustainable. You're not going to get sustained growth. You need the whole system to move upwards together. And that's what he's talking about, that if you don't focus on the incomes of the poor, then sooner or later what you're going to get is that the middle class will stagnate, and their demand for goods and services from within the country will hit a plateau. They will be looking for things imported, goods and services, and so the growth will then get aborted. And that's the problem he's talking about, and that's a genuine problem. So that's why you need to focus at the bottom of that pyramid and make sure that those incomes continue to rise.
So there is one big speculation just ahead of the budget that the government is going to slash the personal income tax for the middle class people in a hope that it is going to revive the consumer confidence and spirit in the economy. Do you think that it's a right step?
No, I mean, this will just worsen the problem that Rothin is talking about. I mean, who does the tax cut affect? It affects the middle class enough, right? Now, you may give rise to a huge amount of consumer confidence among those, but Rothin's point continues to be valid. That they may just spend that money on imported goods, which doesn't help you very much.
So, yeah, few days back, SBI EcoRap report says that India in next financial year is going to create 16 million jobs less than in comparison to the previous year. And also periodic labor force survey of 2017 shows that labor participation has, like 50% of the labor participation has dropped out. Presumably because they didn't have any job.
So no, it's not 50% has dropped out. It is that the labor force participation rate has fallen by 6 percentage points, which is about a 10% decline. So about half the people in the working age group are not in the labor force. It used to be about 45%.
So how do you see this situation?
No, that's a serious situation, because what it is saying in effect is that people don't see the utility of spending time in looking for a job because they don't think jobs exist. Right? So the lack of jobs is getting compounded by people believing that jobs don't exist. Right? This is again an expectations thing, this is a mind thing, but it has very strong economic effects.
So if you will rate the economic prudence of this government in comparison to the UPA, what would be your comment on that?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. Now, UPA 1 was actually fairly prudent. So if you look at all the indicators during UPA, it did very well. UPA 2 started off on a very bad footing because of the global crisis. But I think it did fairly well until 12-13. And then, of course, everything broke down. It was also the period where in 2008, which was still UPA 1, the fiscal prudence was simply thrown away. And there was a massive increase in the fiscal deficit in a single year. And that fiscal deficit actually helped us in the following year when the global crisis broke. So it was good that it was there, but it was completely out of luck. More importantly, it took us a long time to roll that fiscal profligacy back. I think this government did well to start the process of fiscal consolidation. But my sense is that again, post 17-18, what has happened is, although on paper fiscal consolidation is happening, in reality, it's moved in the opposite direction. So if you look at the CAG report for 17-18, it says that the fiscal deficit was not 3.5%, it's actually 5.85%, which would be roughly what it was during 2008, which is, as I said, the high point of a fiscal deficit.
So my last question is, seeing all the poorly performing indicators all across the sector, Prime Minister's dream of creating $5 trillion economy by 2024, do you think that it's a feasible?
2024, I don't think so, because you would have lost 2 years in the middle. This year is gone. Next year is not going to be a whole lot better. It'll be a little better, but not a lot. Okay? Making that up in 3 years is virtually impossible.
Thank you, Mr. Sen. Thanks for talking to us. Thank you.
Pleasure.